The desert wind howled across the rocky terrain of eastern Afghanistan, carrying with it the scent of dust and danger. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos adjusted her scope one final time, her breath steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. From her concealed position on the ridge overlooking the valley, she had a perfect view of the compound below where intelligence suggested a high-value target was hiding. 3 miles away, a team of Navy SEALs moved silently through the darkness, their black uniforms making them nearly invisible against the night sky. Team leader, Chief Petty Officer Jake Morrison, checked his watch. 200 hours. They were right on schedule for what was supposed to be a routine capture operation. Maria had been deployed to Afghanistan for 8 months, serving as a sniper with the 75th Ranger Regiment. She had earned her place through grueling training and had proven herself time and again in the field. Her commanding officers knew they could count on her steady hand and sharp eye when lives were on the line. Tonight was no different, except for the nagging feeling in her gut that something wasn't quite right about this mission. The intelligence briefing had been straightforward enough. A Taliban commander, known as the Wolf, was reportedly hiding in a small compound in the Kunar province. The man was responsible for coordinating attacks on coalition forces and had been on the most wanted list for over a year. The SEALs were to infiltrate the compound, capture him alive if possible, and extract him for interrogation. Maria's role was to provide overwatch, eliminating any threats that might compromise the mission. She had done this dozens of times before, but something about tonight felt different. The intelligence had come from a source that was new and untested, and the compound seemed too quiet for a place where a high-ranking enemy commander was supposedly hiding. Through her night vision scope, Maria watched as the SEAL team approached the outer perimeter of the compound. The buildings were typical of the region: mud brick walls, flat roofs, and small windows. There appeared to be 3 main structures connected by a series of smaller buildings and walls that created a maze-like layout. Chief Morrison hand-signaled to his team, and they split into 2 groups. Petty Officer First Class David Chen and Petty Officer Second Class Marcus Williams would take the eastern approach, while Morrison and Petty Officer Second Class Tommy Rodriguez would circle around to the west. The plan was to converge on the main building simultaneously, trapping anyone inside. Maria tracked their movement through her scope, her finger resting lightly on the trigger. Everything seemed to be going according to plan. The compound remained quiet, with no signs of movement or activity. Perhaps her instincts were wrong, and this would indeed be a routine operation. The SEALs reached their positions and prepared to breach the buildings. Maria could see Morrison crouched next to a wooden door, his hand on the latch. Chen and Williams were in position at another entrance on the opposite side of the compound. Through her earpiece, she heard Morrison's voice, calm and professional as always. "Overwatch, we're in position. Ready to go on your mark." Maria scanned the area one more time, looking for any signs of trouble. The thermal imaging showed no heat signatures other than the 4 SEALs below. "Clear from up here, Chief. You're good to go." "Roger that. Breaching now." Morrison pushed open the door and disappeared into the darkness of the building, followed closely by Rodriguez. At the same time, Chen and Williams entered from the other side. Maria kept her scope trained on the windows and rooftops, ready to engage any threats that might appear. Minutes passed in tense silence. Through her earpiece, she could hear the muffled sounds of the SEALs clearing rooms, their movements precise and methodical. Everything was going smoothly until Morrison's voice came through the radio, tense and urgent. "Overwatch, we've got a problem." "The buildings are empty, completely empty. This isn't right." Maria felt her stomach drop. Empty buildings meant either the intelligence was wrong, or worse, it was a trap. She immediately began scanning the surrounding area more intensively, looking for any signs that enemy forces might be moving to surround the compound. "Chief, I'm not seeing any movement from up here, but something's definitely off. Recommend immediate extraction. Agreed. We're pulling out now. But as the SEALs began to withdraw, Maria's thermal scope picked up something that made her blood run cold. Heat signatures were appearing all around the compound, dozens of them. Enemy fighters were emerging from hidden positions that had been invisible until now. Underground tunnels, concealed bunkers, and camouflaged fighting positions that her surveillance had missed. Contact! Multiple hostiles surrounding your position! Maria's voice was sharp and urgent. Chief, you've got enemies coming from all directions! The night erupted in gunfire as the Taliban fighters opened up on the SEALs. Muzzle flashes lit up the darkness as automatic weapons fire poured into the compound from multiple directions. The SEALs immediately took cover, returning fire with disciplined precision, but they were vastly outnumbered. Maria began engaging targets, her rifle speaking with deadly accuracy. Her first shot dropped a fighter who was positioning himself on a rooftop with an RPG. Her second shot took out a machine gunner who was setting up to rain fire down on Morrison's position, but for every enemy she eliminated, 2 more seemed to take their place. "We're pinned down," Morrison's voice crackled through the radio over the sound of gunfire. "Taking heavy fire from multiple positions. Request immediate support." Maria continued picking off targets, but she could see the situation deteriorating rapidly. The SEALs were trapped in the compound with enemies closing in from all sides. Their ammunition would eventually run out, and the enemy forces seemed to have an endless supply of fighters. Through her scope, she watched as Rodriguez took a bullet to the shoulder, blood spreading across his uniform. Chen was bleeding from a gash on his forehead where shrapnel had struck him. Williams was limping but still fighting. Morrison was coordinating their defense while simultaneously calling for backup. "Base, this is Bravo Team. We are surrounded and taking heavy casualties. Request immediate air support and quick reaction force. Our position is compromised and we need extraction ASAP." The response from base was not what they wanted to hear. "Bravo Team, air support is 30 minutes out. QRF is 45 minutes from your location. Hold your position and wait for support." 30 minutes might as well have been 30 hours. At the rate the enemy was closing in, the SEALs wouldn't last another 10 minutes, let alone 30. Maria could see fighters moving through the compound, getting closer to the building where the SEALs had taken shelter. "Chief, they're closing in on your position. I count at least 50 hostiles, maybe more. You need to move now." "Negative, Overwatch. We've got wounded and there's nowhere to go. We're going to make our stand here." Maria's mind raced as she calculated angles and distances. She was too far away to provide effective close support, but she couldn't just watch her fellow soldiers get overrun. She had to do something. "Chief, I'm going to try to thin out their numbers. Keep your heads down and be ready to move when I give the word." Maria began working her way through the enemy positions systematically. Shot after shot, she eliminated fighters who were advancing on the SEALs' position. Her training kicked in, and time seemed to slow down. Breath, aim, squeeze, move to the next target. Repeat. Each shot was precise, each kill buying the trapped SEALs a few more precious seconds. But even as she worked, more enemies kept appearing. It was like fighting a hydra. Cut off one head, and 2 more would grow back. She realized with growing dread that this wasn't just a random ambush. This was a carefully planned trap, using the fake intelligence about the wolf to lure coalition forces into a kill zone. The Taliban had prepared this position extensively, with multiple fallback positions, hidden supply caches, and reinforcement routes. They had probably been waiting for weeks for an opportunity like this, and the SEALs had walked right into it. "Overwatch, they're massing for a final assault." Morrison's voice was strained but still professional. "We're down to our last few magazines. If you've got any miracles up there, now would be a good time." Maria looked through her scope at the compound below, seeing muzzle flashes erupting from windows and doorways as the SEALs fought desperately against overwhelming odds. She had already taken out more than a dozen enemy fighters, but there were still too many. The situation was hopeless unless something changed dramatically. She keyed her radio and spoke the words that would haunt her for the rest of her life. "Chief, I'm seeing at least 40 hostiles still active and more arriving. You need immediate backup or you're not getting out of there alive." The response was barely audible over the sound of gunfire. "Send backup." Those two words, whispered into the radio in the middle of a firefight, carried the weight of desperation. Maria knew that backup was still 25 minutes away, and the SEALs didn't have 25 seconds, let alone 25 minutes. She made a decision that went against every rule in the sniper's playbook. Instead of maintaining her overwatch position, she was going to leave her hide and move closer to the action. It was dangerous, it was against protocol, and it would put her own life at serious risk. But she couldn't just sit there and watch 4 brave men die when she might be able to do something about it. Maria quickly packed her gear and began making her way down the ridge toward the compound. She moved through the darkness like a ghost, using every bit of cover available. The enemy fighters were so focused on the trapped SEALs that they weren't watching for threats from outside the immediate area. As she moved closer, Maria could hear the increasing intensity of the firefight. The enemy was definitely preparing for a final assault, and she could hear them shouting orders to each other in Pashto. Time was running out fast. She found a new position about 800 meters from the compound, much closer than her original overwatch position, but with better angles on the enemy forces. From here, she could see individual fighters moving between buildings, preparing for what would likely be a coordinated attack that would overwhelm the SEALs' position. Maria set up her rifle again, her hands steady despite the adrenaline and fear coursing through her system. She had a job to do, and 4 men's lives depended on her ability to do it well. The night was far from over, and the real fight was just beginning. Through her earpiece, she could hear Morrison coordinating what might be their final stand. "Rodriguez, you and Williams take the east window. Chen, you're with me on the south side. Make every shot count. We're almost out of ammo." Maria took a deep breath and settled behind her scope. She was about to attempt something that no sniper had ever done before in the history of modern warfare. But as she looked down at the compound where her fellow soldiers were fighting for their lives, she knew she had no choice. "Chief," she whispered into her radio, "help is coming. Just hold on a little longer." Maria's new position gave her a completely different perspective on the battlefield. From 800 meters away, she could see the enemy fighters' tactics much more clearly. They weren't just randomly shooting at the building where the SEALs were trapped. They had organized themselves into coordinated fire teams, with some providing covering fire while others moved to better positions. She counted at least 60 Taliban fighters spread throughout the compound and the surrounding area. Some were positioned on rooftops with machine guns, others were using doorways and windows as firing positions, and still more were moving through the maze of buildings to encircle the SEALs completely. What worried Maria most was a group of about 15 fighters who were organizing near the eastern wall of the compound. They appeared to be preparing for a coordinated assault on the building where the SEALs had taken shelter. If they succeeded in breaching that building, the mission would be over, and 4 good men would die. Maria focused her scope on the leader of this assault group, a tall man with a distinctive white beard who was gesturing and giving orders to the others. He was standing next to what looked like a pile of explosives, probably enough to blow a hole in the wall large enough for the entire assault team to pour through. She steadied her breathing, calculated the wind speed and distance, and slowly squeezed the trigger. The rifle's report echoed across the valley, and the bearded leader dropped instantly. The effect on his men was immediate. They scattered, looking around wildly for the source of the shot. "One down," Maria whispered to herself as she worked the bolt and chambered another round. Through her earpiece, she heard Morrison's voice, tense but hopeful. "Did you see that? Someone just took out their assault leader." "There's another shooter out there," Maria smiled grimly as she acquired her next target, a machine gunner on a rooftop who had been raining fire down on the SEAL's position. The man was partially concealed behind a low wall, but enough of his body was exposed for a clean shot. Maria's second bullet found its mark, and the machine gun fell silent. But now the enemy forces knew they were being engaged from a different direction. Some of the fighters began turning their attention away from the trapped SEALs to search for this new threat. Maria could see muzzle flashes turning in her direction as they tried to locate her position. This was exactly what she had hoped for. By drawing some of their fire away from the SEALs, she was giving them a chance to reposition or possibly even break out of their surrounded position. But it also meant that she was now in extreme danger herself. A bullet whined past her head, close enough that she could feel the displacement of air. The enemy had spotted her muzzle flash and were beginning to zero in on her position. She would have to move soon, but first, she needed to thin out their numbers significantly. Maria shifted her aim to a cluster of 3 fighters who were advancing on the SEAL's building from the north side. They were moving tactically, leapfrogging from cover to cover, but they were predictable. She waited for the lead fighter to expose himself as he moved to the next position, then took the shot. He crumpled to the ground. The other 2 fighters immediately took cover and began scanning for threats. One of them made the mistake of raising his head too high above the wall he was hiding behind. Maria's 4th shot sent him sprawling backward. The 3rd fighter in that group was smarter. He stayed low and began crawling away from his original position. But Maria had been tracking him through her scope, and when he thought he was safe enough to make a run for better cover, she was ready. Her 5th shot caught him in mid-sprint. 5 down, she counted silently, but there were still so many more. Through her radio, she heard Rodriguez's pained voice. "Chief, I'm hit again. Shoulder's pretty bad, but I can still fight." "Stay down, Rodriguez. Help is coming," Morrison replied. "I don't know who's out there, but they're giving us a fighting chance." Maria continued her deadly work, moving systematically through the enemy positions. A sniper on a distant rooftop who thought he was safely concealed became her 6th target. 2 fighters who were trying to flank the SEAL's position from the west became targets 7 and 8. But as she worked, more enemy fighters kept arriving. She could see vehicles approaching in the distance, trucks full of reinforcements who had heard the gunfire and were coming to investigate. The situation was getting worse, not better. A rocket-propelled grenade suddenly streaked across the valley in her direction, exploding about 50 meters to her left. They were getting closer to her position, and she knew she would have to move soon. But every second she stayed here was another chance to take out more enemies and buy the SEALs more time. Her 9th target was a fighter with an RPG who was positioning himself to fire directly into the building where the SEALs were trapped. That shot potentially saved all 4 of their lives. The 10th and 11th targets were a 2-man mortar team who were setting up their weapon behind a pile of rubble. Maria was operating in what snipers call the zone, a state of complete focus where time seems to slow down and every shot feels inevitable rather than uncertain. Her training, experience, and natural ability had all combined to create something that bordered on the supernatural. The 12th target was particularly challenging, a fighter who was moving rapidly between buildings, never exposing himself for more than a second or 2. Maria had to predict his movement pattern and fire at where he would be, rather than where he was. When he appeared in a doorway exactly where she had anticipated, her bullet was waiting for him. By now, the enemy forces were in complete confusion. They were taking accurate fire from an unknown position, losing fighters faster than they could replace them, and their coordinated assault on the SEALs had completely fallen apart. Some of the fighters were beginning to retreat to more defensible positions. But Maria knew this was only temporary. Once they regrouped and organized, they would come back with greater numbers and better tactics. She had to make the most of this opportunity while their forces were in disarray. Targets 13 and 14 were snipers who had been trying to get a fix on her position. She spotted their scopes glinting in the moonlight and eliminated them before they could take their shots. Target 15 was a commander who was trying to rally his scattered forces. The reinforcements from the trucks were now arriving at the compound, and Maria could see that her temporary advantage was about to disappear. There were simply too many enemies, and they would soon have her position surrounded, just as they had surrounded the SEALs. She made a split-second decision that would have seemed insane to any rational person. Instead of withdrawing to a safer position, she was going to move even closer to the compound. The enemy fighters would never expect someone to advance directly toward their stronghold, and the closer she got, the more chaos she could create. Maria packed up her gear once again and began moving through the darkness toward the compound. She used every piece of natural cover available, rocks, dried creek beds, abandoned buildings, to mask her movement. The sound of gunfire helped cover any noise she might have made. She found a position just 400 meters from the compound, dangerously close but with excellent visibility of the entire area. From here, she could see individual faces through her scope, and her accuracy would be even more devastating. Her 16th target was a machine gunner who had just set up a new position. Her 17th was a fighter who was carrying a box of ammunition to resupply other positions. The 18th and 19th targets were two fighters who were trying to coordinate an assault on the eastern side of the building where the SEALs were trapped. Through her earpiece, she could hear that the SEALs were still fighting, but their situation remained desperate. "We're down to our last magazine," Chen reported. "If this keeps up much longer, we're going to have to switch to pistols." Maria increased her rate of fire. Taking more risks but achieving greater results, Target 20 was eliminated while he was trying to climb onto a roof. Target 21 fell while attempting to position an RPG for a shot at Maria's suspected location. Target 22 was a spotter who was trying to direct other fighters toward her actual position. The enemy forces were now in complete panic. They had lost more than a third of their fighters to an unseen enemy, and their carefully planned ambush had turned into a nightmare. Some of the newer fighters were beginning to flee, while the more experienced ones were trying to establish defensive positions. But Maria wasn't finished. She could see a group of 5 fighters who were still attempting to organize an assault on the SEAL's position. They had found a partially concealed route that would allow them to approach the building from its blind spot. If they succeeded, they could throw grenades through the windows and end the fight. Maria shifted her position slightly to get a better angle on this group. Her 23rd target was the leader of the assault team. Her 24th was a fighter carrying what looked like satchel charges, explosives that could bring down the entire building. The 25th target was the most important shot of the entire engagement. Through her scope, Maria could see a fighter who had managed to get very close to the building where the SEALs were trapped. He was pulling the pin from a grenade and preparing to throw it through one of the windows. Time seemed to freeze as Maria realized that this single grenade could kill or severely wound all 4 SEALs. She had one chance to stop him, and if she missed, her fellow soldiers would pay the price with their lives. Maria controlled her breathing, steadied her aim, and slowly squeezed the trigger. The shot was perfect, striking the fighter just as his arm was moving forward to throw the grenade. The explosive device fell from his lifeless hand and detonated harmlessly outside the building. 25 enemies eliminated. The tide of battle had completely turned. The remaining Taliban fighters, realizing that their position was hopeless and that they were facing an enemy sniper of extraordinary skill, began a general retreat. They abandoned their positions and fled into the night, leaving behind their equipment and their wounded. Through her radio, Maria heard Morrison's voice, filled with amazement and relief. "I don't know who you are out there, but you just saved our lives. The hostiles are withdrawing. We're going to hold this position until backup arrives." Maria remained in her position, watching the compound through her scope to make sure the enemy retreat was genuine and not just a tactical withdrawal. But after 30 minutes of silence, she was convinced that the immediate threat had passed. The sound of helicopters in the distance announced the arrival of the Quick Reaction Force and medical evacuation teams. Soon, the night sky was filled with the comforting noise of American aircraft, and Maria knew that the SEALs would be safe. She had accomplished something that military historians would later call impossible. A single sniper had broken up a coordinated enemy assault and turned a certain defeat into victory. But for Maria, there was only relief that her fellow soldiers were still alive. As she began the long trek back to her original position to await extraction, Maria reflected on the night's events. She had fired 25 shots and achieved 25 kills, perfect accuracy under the most stressful conditions imaginable. But more importantly, 4 brave men were going home to their families because of her actions. The war was far from over, and there would be many more dangerous missions ahead. But tonight, in a remote valley in Afghanistan, a hidden female sniper had proven that sometimes one person can make all the difference between life and death, victory and defeat. The SEALs below were finally safe, and the whispered words, "Send backup," had been answered in the most dramatic way possible. The sound of rotors cutting through the pre-dawn air grew louder as 3 Black Hawk helicopters approached the compound. Maria watched from her concealed position as the Quick Reaction Force fast-roped down into the now quiet battleground. Heavily armed rangers immediately secured the perimeter while medics rushed toward the building where the SEALs had been trapped for what felt like an eternity. Through her scope, Maria could see the 4 Navy SEALs emerging from their shelter for the first time in over an hour. Chief Morrison was supporting Rodriguez, whose shoulder wound had left his left arm hanging uselessly at his side. Chen had a field dressing wrapped around his head where shrapnel had caught him, but he was walking under his own power. Williams was limping badly but refused assistance from the medics who tried to help him. Maria felt a wave of relief wash over her as she watched the medical team begin treating the wounded SEALs. They were alive, they were safe, and they were going home. Everything she had risked tonight had been worth it, just to see them standing upright and breathing. Her radio crackled with the voice of the QRF commander, Major Patricia Hayes. "This is Sabre 6. Compound is secure. 4 friendly casualties, all stable and ready for evacuation. But I need to know, who was providing sniper support tonight? We're looking at 25 confirmed enemy kills, and someone out there deserves recognition." Maria hesitated for a moment before keying her radio. According to standard protocol, she should have maintained radio silence and waited for official extraction orders. But these men deserved to know who had helped save their lives. "Sabre 6, this is Ghost 7. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, 75th Rangers. I was providing overwatch for the SEAL team when they got pinned down." There was a long pause before Major Hayes responded, her voice filled with astonishment. "Ghost 7, are you telling me you eliminated 25 hostiles single-handedly from a sniper position?" "Affirmative, Sabre 6. Confirmed 25 kills over approximately 90 minutes of engagement." Maria could hear murmuring in the background as the information was passed around the command team. 25 confirmed kills in a single engagement was unheard of in modern warfare, especially for a lone sniper operating without support. "Ghost 7, what's your current position? We're sending a bird to extract you immediately." Maria provided her coordinates and began gathering her equipment. Her ghillie suit was torn in several places from her movement through the rocky terrain, and her rifle was covered in dust and debris. But everything had functioned perfectly when it mattered most. As she waited for extraction, Maria took one final look at the compound through her scope. The Rangers were moving through the area, documenting the enemy casualties and collecting intelligence. She could see them examining the various positions where Taliban fighters had fallen, probably trying to reconstruct exactly how the battle had unfolded. The extraction helicopter arrived 15 minutes later, a Black Hawk with door gunners scanning the surrounding area for any remaining threats. As Maria climbed aboard, the crew chief handed her a headset so she could communicate over the noise of the rotors. Ma'am, I've been flying extraction missions for 8 years, and I've never seen anything like what we found down there," the crew chief said, his voice filled with respect. "Those enemy positions were spread out over a quarter-mile, and every single shot was a clean kill. How long have you been a sniper?" 3 years, Maria replied simply, not feeling comfortable with the praise. In her mind, she had just done her job. The fact that her job had required extraordinary skill and courage was beside the point. As the helicopter lifted off and headed back to the forward operating base, Maria could see the sun beginning to rise over the mountains of eastern Afghanistan. The golden light illuminated the battlefield below, making it look peaceful and serene. Nothing like the hell it had been just a few hours earlier. During the flight, Maria learned more about what had happened from the crew chief and the medics who were treating Rodriguez's shoulder wound. The intelligence that had led to the mission had indeed been false, planted by Taliban forces specifically to lure American troops into a trap. The compound had been prepared for weeks, with hidden fighting positions and supply caches positioned throughout the area. What the enemy hadn't counted on was the possibility that their carefully laid ambush would be disrupted by a single sniper operating from an unexpected position. Maria's decision to leave her overwatch position and move closer to the action had been tactically unsound, according to the textbook, but it had been exactly what the situation required. When they arrived at the base, Maria was surprised to find a small crowd waiting for them. Word of the night's events had already spread throughout the camp, and soldiers from various units had gathered to see the female sniper who had single-handedly broken up an enemy ambush. But Maria's attention was focused on the 4 SEALs who were being loaded onto stretchers for transport to the medical facility. Before they were taken away, Chief Morrison caught her eye and nodded. It was a simple gesture, but it conveyed everything that needed to be said between professional soldiers. He understood what she had done for him and his team, and she understood that he would have done the same for her. Over the next several hours, Maria underwent a thorough debriefing with intelligence officers who wanted to understand exactly how the engagement had unfolded. She walked them through every detail, from her initial concerns about the intelligence to her decision to leave her overwatch position to her systematic elimination of the enemy forces. The intelligence officers were particularly interested in her description of the enemy tactics and the layout of their positions. It was clear that this had been a sophisticated trap, and understanding how it had been set up would help prevent similar ambushes in the future. Colonel David Warren, the base commander, personally conducted the final portion of the debriefing. He was a combat veteran with over 20 years of experience, and Maria could tell that he was genuinely impressed by what she had accomplished. "Sergeant Santos, I've read a lot of after-action reports over the years, but nothing quite like this," Colonel Warren said. 25 confirmed kills in a single engagement is extraordinary. But what's even more remarkable is the tactical decision-making you displayed under pressure. Leaving your overwatch position was risky, but it was exactly what the situation required. Maria remained at attention, unsure how to respond. She had acted on instinct and training, not because she was seeking glory or recognition. The idea that her actions were being labeled as extraordinary made her uncomfortable. "Sir, I just did what needed to be done to keep my fellow soldiers alive," she replied. "That attitude is exactly why you were able to accomplish what you did," the colonel said. "But I want you to understand that your actions tonight will have consequences beyond just saving those 4 SEALs. Military analysts will study this engagement for years to come. You've demonstrated capabilities that many people thought were impossible." Over the next few days, as the SEALs recovered from their wounds, more details about the mission began to emerge. Intelligence analysts determined that the Taliban had been planning similar ambushes throughout the region, using false intelligence to lure small teams of coalition forces into kill zones. Maria's success in breaking up this particular ambush had likely prevented multiple similar attacks. The story of the female sniper who had eliminated 25 enemies began to spread throughout the military community, and eventually reached the media back home. Maria found herself uncomfortable with the attention, preferring to focus on her duties rather than deal with reporters and publicity. But the recognition was unavoidable. Maria was awarded the Silver Star for her actions that night, becoming one of only a handful of women to receive the military's third highest decoration for valor. The citation read, "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action against an armed enemy while serving as a sniper with the 75th Ranger Regiment in support of Special Operations Forces." More importantly to Maria, all 4 SEALs made full recoveries from their wounds and returned to active duty. Rodriguez required surgery to repair damage to his shoulder, but he was back in the field within 6 months. Chen's head wound healed without complications, and Williams's leg injury turned out to be less serious than initially feared. Chief Morrison wrote a personal letter to Maria, thanking her for her actions and inviting her to visit his team when she returned to the United States. In the letter he wrote, "You are the reason my wife still has a husband and my children still have a father. There are no words adequate to express my gratitude." The night's events also led to changes in how sniper support was integrated into special operations missions. Military planners began developing new tactics that would allow snipers more flexibility to reposition during engagements, rather than being locked into static overwatch positions. Maria completed her deployment in Afghanistan 3 months later, having participated in dozens of additional missions. But none of them compared to the night when she had eliminated 25 enemies to save 4 trapped SEALs. That engagement had become the defining moment of her military career and had changed how the military thought about the capabilities of individual soldiers. When she returned home to Fort Benning, Georgia, Maria was promoted to Sergeant First Class and assigned to the sniper school as an instructor. She found satisfaction in passing on her knowledge and experience to the next generation of military marksmen, both male and female. During her classes, Maria would often tell her students about that night in Afghanistan, emphasizing not the shooting itself, but the decision-making process that had led to success. She would explain how she had recognized that the situation required her to abandon standard doctrine and take unprecedented risks. "Marksmanship is only part of being a sniper," she would tell her students. "The real skill is in reading the battlefield and understanding what needs to be done. Sometimes that means taking shots that seem impossible. Sometimes it means moving when every instinct tells you to stay put. And sometimes it means accepting responsibility for other people's lives." Years later, when military historians wrote about the war in Afghanistan, that engagement in the Kunar province would be cited as one of the most remarkable individual achievements in modern warfare. But for Maria Santos, it would always be remembered as simply the night when 4 good men needed help, and she had been in a position to provide it. The whispered words, "Send backup," had been answered in the most dramatic way possible, proving that sometimes the most effective backup comes not from additional troops or air support, but from a single soldier with the skill, courage, and determination to do whatever it takes to bring everyone home alive. In her quiet moments, Maria would often think about the Taliban fighters she had killed that night. She felt no satisfaction in taking lives, but she understood that in war, sometimes violence is the only way to protect innocents. Those 25 enemy casualties had prevented the deaths of 4 American soldiers, and that was a trade she could live with. The story became legend in military circles, passed down from one generation of soldiers to the next. It served as inspiration for countless men and women who would face their own moments of crisis and decision. And somewhere in a small town in America, 4 families continued their normal lives because a hidden female sniper had been watching over their sons and husbands on a dark night in Afghanistan. Maria Santos had proven that heroes come in all forms, and that sometimes the most important battles are fought not by armies, but by individuals who refuse to let their fellow soldiers down. The night she eliminated 25 enemies would forever stand as a testament to the power of skill, courage, and determination in the face of overwhelming odds.